The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John, Chapter 17, Seven's Blackboard in the Sky, and Aspects 4 and 5. Joseph stared at his painting uneasily. It had the oddest kind of mobility. The mosaics seemed to jump up, move out of place, even shift, as if the painting didn't want to stay on the canvas, as he didn't want to stay in one place either. Why should he? If he pretended to agree to Elgren's proposal, they'd allow him some freedom, and then he could escape easily enough, he thought craftily. Bianca would be furious. He grinned. What a man-trap she was, and she knew it. Now he sat on the edge of the bed, relaxing, eyeing one painting after another, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight that splashed through the windows onto the wooden floor. He'd been painting for hours. What a great day's work, he thought. What a perfect studio. Who could ask for more? He almost dozed, his muscles relaxing in the summer heat. In his mind's eye he saw the room cozy in winter time, without the windows boarded like last year, a rug on the floor to keep his feet warm, he'd insist on it, and a bright coverlet for the bed. Bianca could damned well make one. But there would also be her room. Aha! Their room, for sleeping and romping. And he'd gone scrambling through the countryside for the last time, half-starving, peddling his talent. This time he'd done himself well, outdone himself, set himself up for good. The sunlight moved over the tiles in the painting. Joseph watched, nearly hypnotized, dreaming of the comforts of the good life. Then he caught himself. Not that he intended to go along with any of it, of course. He was just playing around with the idea of staying before turning it down, exaggerating the benefits so he could feel doubly virtuous and twice as crafty when he finally got out of there, regained his freedom, and left the Hosentofts more or less the way he'd found them. There was no doubt in his mind that he would leave as soon as he got the chance. A small, ladylike knock came at the door. Joseph's face lit up exuberantly. Come in. Bianca came into the room with the new shyness she'd developed since the arrangement arose for discussion. She left the door open, and at this Joseph laughed out loud. Her face clouded. Mama's orders, Papa's too. It isn't funny. They don't know about us last winter. Despite himself, Joseph remembered the two of them hot and sweaty beneath the covers, though the room had been chilly enough. He said, Well, come in anyway. You can come in, can't you? She looked at him as demurely as she could manage under the circumstances. She had to show him that she could make a wife as well as a bed companion. Now she couldn't afford to be bold. If you don't stop trying to be such a grand lady, you'll explode, he said. Ah, shut up, she said, before she caught herself. That's better. Now close the door and let's go to bed. You know I can't. She was honestly scandalized. If we're going to get married, then it's not right. Good. We'll go to bed and forget marriage. You think I'm trapping you. You? How could you trap me? I do only what I want to do, he shouted. She sat down next to him, averting her eyes, not yelling back at him as she used to do, and it worried him. She stuck her legs out in the air parallel to the bed, under her long skirts and petticoats, and wiggled her booted feet in small, perfect circles. Her hands were in her lap. "That's a pretty picture," she said, looking at the courtyard scene. "Say, what's on your mind?" Joseph said uneasily. "You could go right inside that picture and walk to that yard or whatever it is, and no one would find us," she giggled softly. "The picture's big enough. We'd just disappear." He stared at her. "I didn't know you had such an imagination. I didn't know you liked the painting either." He paused. "Come on, let's talk about something else," he said. He didn't know if he liked the idea of Bianca having imaginative qualities or not. He was growing more uncomfortable every minute. The room seemed to be waiting. It had an unreal clarity to it. Extraordinary, he thought. If he could only duplicate those colors. The sunlight almost had a texture. There were variations in transparency so that one moment he could see through it and the next moment it became heavier, though without any suggestion of weight. Thicker, moving in golden columns of air. "You look so funny," Bianca said. He turned and saw that the room's transformation affected her also. The brown hair was an intricate, thick, and lovely webwork around her face. Her eyes seemed built up of deepening layers of color, not isolated, but flowing one into the other. The pupils, small pools, sunken miraculously in the eye sockets. The cheeks cast rich purple shadows that echoed the firm jawline. The face was a living landscape. He saw it, filled with these soft hills and valleys of flesh, with Bianca's moods illuminating it from within, flashing across it like clouds or sun emerge and disappear in the sky above the earth. "Don't move. Don't move an inch. Just sit still." He was rising. Everything was shifting. He felt room, sunlight, everything in precarious balance. He had to get her just right, this moment, before it all changed forever. One canvas was prepared for painting. He grabbed it and began to sketch her face. She stared at him, filled with awe. He was like one possessed, she thought. Not daring to move, she sat until her muscles ached. "No, no, don't move," he said. "I've got to rest," she protested. "Not now. You can't." But he saw then that she was losing the pose. The muscles were quivering like shadows underneath the skin. All right, he said. "Take a rest, and then return to the same pose." "But I can't just sit like a statue so you can paint me." "Why not? Of course you can. Think about something else." "Let me see what you've done." She sprang up. No, not now, later." At his insistence, she sat back down and they resumed. They went through the same routine 3 times when Joseph finally put his brush down. "The light's no good now. Come back tomorrow at the same time." "What? Besides, Mama may not—" "Tell her I said to send you, damn it," he thundered. She backed away, and he realized with amazement that he'd frightened her. "Bianca, I didn't mean to yell. It's just that my work is important. You're a good model, a great model. I don't know why I didn't realize it before." "Could I see what you've done then?" she asked. "Yes, yes. Anything to mollify you," he said. She stood in front of the easel. The canvas was barely covered, yet the face seemed to be appearing from within the canvas, peeking out, emerging from some hidden dimension. "It's spooky, looking at my face unfinished like that," she said. "You think it's spooky, do you?" he said, laughing now, in good spirits. Bianca stared at the painting and then at Joseph. Then she made one of her shrewdest moves of her life. If he saw her like that, she thought, then she had no worries. "Mama's resting," she said. "Papa and my brothers are in the fields. If you want, you can leave. I won't tell or give warning. If you go west from the house, no one will see you. I don't want you to feel trapped. I thought I wanted you any way I could get you. Now do what you want." At first Joseph didn't believe her. She stared at him again, then turned toward the door. "I'll go downstairs. You can only have an hour or so to get clear. When Mama wakens, I'll keep her busy in the kitchen for as long as I can. If you're still here by supper time, well then, that's your choice." And she was gone. Damn good of her, Joseph thought. At least she was sporting. He wondered what he could manage to take and what he'd have to leave. Once he left with only the clothes on his back and a few extras. Now he had 7 paintings in various stages of completion. The exuberance was at him again. He threw some belongings in his knapsack. Free again! Wandering the villages and the fairs, the outsider with his canvases and paints. He started to hum. The sound vibrated satisfactorily through his teeth. His travail and imprisonment were over. Ah! But even as his mouth hurt from grinning so broadly, he avoided looking at his paintings. He tried to pretend they weren't there, and all the while he wondered, would he really leave? Then he turned around and saw the paintings. Would he be free to go? Of course he would. No one was keeping him, after all. He went on thinking and humming, because no matter how loudly he hummed, the thoughts wouldn't go away. If no one was keeping him, then what was? What kind of game was he playing with himself? Had Bianca unknowingly, or shrewdly, called his bluff? Lord, what nonsense went through a man's mind at times! Of course he was leaving. He was half-packed, and he turned. His paintings stood there like living entities materializing out of paint and canvas. The sun and shadows within them now seemed more real than the sun and shadows within the room itself. He couldn't leave them, and he couldn't take them. Some were too wet. He didn't dare roll them up. They'd crack and be ruined. For a moment he felt really frightened and more imprisoned than ever. But what a great technical job he'd done on those tiles! He bent closer to the courtyard painting. The way he'd applied the coats of lacquers so that the transparent colors lay clearly one over the other, without muddying. But suddenly it was as if the various layers of color somehow represented his own emotions. Not physically, but mentally he felt himself falling through the coats of lacquers. Only in doing so he was falling from one emotion to another. The feelings had been opaque. Now they were so transparent that he saw them with childlike brilliance. But the dizzying physical sensation of falling through them remained, though he knew he was standing quite solidly on the floor. They were his emotions. First there was his desire to leave. He felt this so strongly that his stomach ached with longing. But then he fell through that feeling to the one beneath. This one was a combination of relief and shame, so closely bound together, glued, that the feelings were like fabric, and he fell into the soft, slippery folds of unsuspected shame. His real emotions, buried, denied, now caught him. He was really so glad to have a place, so really delighted not to be wandering half-hungry, that he was ashamed. A man should be free, not tied down to one family, one room, one woman. Tears ran down his face as he fell through the shame to the emotion that had been beneath. The anger felt like a thick red web that enveloped him. He stormed about the room, feeling the web grab at him, catch his legs in a tight grasp. Even this gave way, and he tumbled headlong into the fear that had given the anger its strength. He tossed a chair across the room and threw his knapsack at the wall. For this was what had been bothering him, beneath all the other guises. The fear, he tried to avoid it, but it was too late, of course. The inspiration that he'd wanted so desperately had come, and it had somehow betrayed him. It was forcing him to care, to feel, to become attached. Even while the inspiration seemed to come from another world, it was forcing him to relate to this one, and he hadn't wanted to. Even the Hosentofts were becoming real to him. They were no longer caricatures that he could make fun of or ignore. The super-clear light bathed the room again, or he was only imagining it. He turned. Amazingly, Bianca stood in the doorway, staring. He hadn't even heard her come up the stairs. She was different, too, he saw, uneasily. She was no longer just someone to romp with, or the model for his latest painting. She was herself, whatever that meant, with a reality of her own apart from his, alive with the same tormenting complexity of emotions that he'd just experienced and usually tried to hide. "You didn't leave," she said. This time she closed the door. She looked so splendid. She might have just stepped out of one of his paintings, he thought. Grinning at him, she went over and waited for him by the bed, willing to make some compromises now that matters seemed sealed. They threw their clothes off, shouting happy obscenities at each other. In his mind's eye, Joseph saw the two of them lying in the courtyard on the hot tiles, and staring from the painting out into the room. Actually, Proteus stood in that precise spot in the real courtyard, with Window beside him, and Window could have seen into Joseph's room. He was staring in the right direction, as far as space alone is concerned. But instead he was concentrating on Proteus's discovery. "I'm sure of it," Proteus said. "We were standing right here talking a while ago, remember? Then we walked back to talk to more of your people. I was upset because you saw that black girl, and you were trying to divert me, I think. Then we drifted back here, but that one tile. Earlier you were staring at it as you told me what you were seeing, and it didn't have that sign or symbol on it then. I'm positive. It could have been a different tile, Window said. But it wasn't. I know it's the same one. I kept staring at it because you were, and that mark wasn't on it. If you're right, then someone had to do it while we were gone. But look at it, Proteus cried angrily. Get down and see for yourself. That's what's so unbelievable. It isn't a fresh mark. It's old. It's been there for ages, yet it wasn't there a few moments ago. Window knelt down, examining the tile. The blue fish with its lost tail sparkled even in the dim light, and a small symbol was clearly visible just above the fish's eye. You're right. So it must have been there earlier, and we just overlooked it, he said. But it's almost dark now. It would have been easier to see when you were here before, Proteus said impatiently. You're the one with all those abilities. Find out where the mark came from. Rising, Window smiled. All of a sudden you sound like Story defending herself against your skepticism. I don't remember seeing the mark earlier either. But in this case, common sense tells us that we're just missed seeing it for some reason. Now I do know how Story felt, Proteus said, and I don't like it. Maybe there's no explanation, but I know you're wrong, and something about that symbol is important. Window said, either the mark was there and we didn't see it, or it was put there while we were gone and in such a way that it appears old. The first explanation is clearly the more reasonable one. I don't care. It makes me uneasy, Proteus said. This arouses my curiosity more than any demonstration of your abilities or stories just because it happened to me, I suppose. No matter what you tell me, I know the mark wasn't there earlier, and I'm going to find out where it came from, one way or another. Proteus straightened up, his voice ringing with such intensity that Window couldn't help teasing him. This is our pragmatic Proteus? He asked. See, Cypress said to OverSoul7, each of your personalities interpreted your experience with the aspects of the tile in their own way. Lydia used it to feel her own identity in the midst of shifting time. Maha and Joseph used it emotionally too, perceiving to some extent the many aspects of their own subjective reality. And Proteus is letting it open his mind to new probabilities. But OverSoul7 was staring at the symbol that was indisputably now set in the tile. He turned to watch Proteus and Window as they walked away, and then shook his 14-year-old type head. Proteus is right. That symbol shouldn't be there. At least Proteus shouldn't be able to see it. When I traveled to Maha's time, the sign wasn't there in the tile in her courtyard. It's her signature, the sign that she scribbled just now in the tile, definitely, when she got angry at Sumter. Exactly, Cypress said. Exactly what? Seven cried excitedly. What do you mean? I've told you before that everything happens at once. Yes, but... And that time is open-ended. Yes, but... OverSoul7 felt on the verge of a great discovery, but he couldn't quite get it. His predicament was so obvious, and to Cypress amusing, that she started laughing. "Stop it," Seven said. "I'm distracted enough. Let's see. Everything happens at once. So while I had my experience with the tiles and how they exist in time, then each of my personalities did the same thing, but in their own way. I understand that much. In Earth terms, my experience rippled out in all directions." "An excellent analogy," Cypress said. "Yes, but new things happened. I see what Lydia did or tried to do. She went back in time and realized that the past and the present are happening at once. So she tried to change the present by changing the past. But there's a big difference between that and the other thing that happened. Maha signed the tile, but Proteus saw it in his present where it hadn't been a few minutes earlier, and it wasn't there in my earlier either." "Of course. Go on," Cypress said. "Go on? I can't. That's where I get lost," Seven said dejectedly. "There's something that's escaping me." "There certainly is," Cypress said, smiling. She kept changing from a man's form to a woman's so swiftly that Seven said, "I don't mean to be rude, but couldn't you stop doing that just for now?" "It's supposed to remind you of something," Cypress said, "but you're too involved with this particular problem right now to pay any attention." And she steadied down to the woman's form that she'd used as a matter of convention. "You don't have to sound so superior either," Seven said angrily. "I never had an examination like this in my lives, any of them, and I hope I never have another like it in the future, if you'll forgive the term." "Oh dear Seven, do calm down and try to understand," Cypress said. "The so-called past is a source of fresh action and constant creativity, just like the future or present." "I know that. That isn't the part that confuses me." "So Maha signed the tile now and affected Proteus's present," Cypress said. "A few moments earlier she hadn't done it in the past, so it couldn't appear. It hadn't happened." "Ah, I caught you," Seven cried. "I was always afraid that I would, someday, but I wanted to, too. Now that it's happened, I wish that it hadn't. I've caught you in the worst kind of contradiction." "Don't look so soulful," Cypress said softly. Seven didn't even smile. He just threw Cypress a reproachful look and said, "You said that Maha hadn't signed the tile yet, so it couldn't appear in Proteus' 23rd century. But, Cypress, that doesn't make sense. Not if everything happens at once." "You can scowl just like Lydia," Cypress said. "All right, take Lydia. She went back and did something new in the past," Seven said, scowling even harder. "I understand that, I think. Yes, I'm sure I do." Suddenly, Seven got so excited that he blinked off and on until he even made Cypress dizzy. "I'm getting it! I'm getting it! I think. New things can happen in the past, right? Even as the present happens and keeps happening, the past keeps happening and new events can happen in it." "Oh, no, that's not quite what I mean." "You're getting closer, though," Cypress said, excited herself. "Make up an analogy if you have to." An analogy? This entire examination is an analogy, if you ask me, 7 exploded. But the next thing he knew, he had an analogy so real and vivid that he was astounded. I must be making it big so I can see it clearly, he apologized, grinning. For written across the entire sky in towering, shining letters was the following message: past time equals capital P plus capital P little r plus capital P little f. All in caps, present time equals capital P capital R little p plus capital P capital R little r plus capital P capital R lowercase f. All caps, future time equals f little p plus f plus little p little r plus f little f. Since this is an examination, I'm using the sky as a blackboard, 7 said proudly. An extra touch that should earn me a few extra credits, I hope. It's put rather simply, so I'm sure that it's clear. Just look at it. He'd really outdone himself. The glowing letters covered the sky from horizon to horizon. On second thought, 7 gave the letters shadows that now covered the tile floor of Proteus' 23rd century courtyard, so that tiles and grass were full of contrast and brilliance. "How do you like that?" he cried triumphantly. "Now that's a landscape and skyscape no one is apt to forget." "Breathtaking," Cypress said. "Would you mind giving me your interpretation of the letters?" "Can anyone else see it?" 7 asked. "It's a pity to create something so spectacular and have it more or less go to waste." "7," Cypress said, with at least a touch of severity. "All right. I made an analogy so I could understand, and I made up my own formula to express it. All time is simultaneous. There isn't any contradiction, thank heaven. But while we're at all attached to ideas of time or people who believe in them, then certain contradictions appear to exist. Actually, they're not there. They're only the result of limited perception. So I made up this formula to explain the contradiction that isn't there. Must you be so wordy? All right. It's as though there were 3 kinds of time, perception-wise: past time, present time, and future time. Look, as he spoke, 7 demonstrated, and in the sky above the letters 3 boxes appeared like this. First box, past time. Next box, present time. The next box, future time. "Excellent," Cypress said, concealing a smile. "You certainly are inventive." "Now listen," 7 said impatiently. "I put those kinds of time in big letters to show that they're the main divisions. But there's a past, present, and future in past time, and a past, present, and future in present time, and a past, present, and future in future time." "I see what you're getting at," Cypress said. "So the past has its own present, past, and future in small letters like this," 7 said, and he added the letters in the boxes in the sky thus. First box, past time, and underneath present, past, and future. And then the next box, present time, present, past, and future. And then the next box, future time, present, past, and future. Seven was so taken with his own creation that he stared with awe at the giant boxes and the huge sparkling letters. "There's so much I haven't got yet," he said, "but I'm getting it. For one thing, that middle box, marked present time, is particularly intriguing. Seven, you're getting very close to something very important," Cypress said. "Whatever happens, remember, you create your own reality. You're apt to get lost in your own analogy. Be careful, Seven. There are implications." "Careful? Why? I'm fascinated," Seven cried. "Don't be too impetuous," she said. But Seven was muttering, "That middle box, Lydia's present time is in it, with its own present, past, and future. But so is Proteus's, isn't it? And Joseph's and Maha's. It's according to... But no, Lydia certainly thinks it's her present time. Dear Seven, please, you must remember, you create your own reality." But it was too late. Seven felt himself drawn up toward the middle box, analogy or no, and into its mosaic-like structure. There were cubes within cubes within cubes, endlessly it seemed, and in one Lydia waited. End chapter 17. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.